The town of Evergreen, nestled in the snow-draped mountains of Colorado, was the kind of place that seemed to belong in a Christmas card. Its streets were lined with old brick buildings adorned with twinkling lights, and wreaths hung on every door, as though the entire town had collectively agreed to embrace the holiday spirit. It was December 23rd, and everyone was preparing for Christmas Eve. Everyone, that is, except for Noah Bennett. Noah, a 29-year-old Army veteran, had just stepped off a bus at the corner of Evergreen's main street. He was dressed in his fatigues, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and his heart heavy with the weight of the past 3 years. This was his first Christmas home since enlisting, and while Evergreen hadn't changed much, Noah felt like a stranger in his own skin. The war had left him with scars, some visible, like the faint mark above his brow, and others hidden deep within. Noah's parents had passed away years ago, leaving the house he grew up in to his older brother, Ethan. Ethan had texted him just a week ago, "Come home for Christmas, Noah, the family's waiting." The family Ethan referred to included his wife, Caroline, their 2 kids, and an old German shepherd named Barry. Noah hadn't seen Barry in years, but he still remembered the dog as a loyal companion who'd been with the family since he was a puppy. As Noah trudged through the snow toward Ethan's house, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was missing. It wasn't just the awkwardness of coming home after so long or the unease of facing questions he didn't know how to answer. It was her. Lila Matthews. Lila had been Noah's high school sweetheart. She was the girl who cheered the loudest at his football games, who stayed up late studying with him for finals, and who kissed him goodbye at the bus station the day he left for basic training. They'd promised to write, and for a while they had. But the letters had slowed, and eventually they stopped. Noah didn't know if she'd moved away, gotten married, or simply moved on, but not knowing haunted him. By the time Noah reached Ethan's house, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the snow. Barry greeted him at the door with a wagging tail and a joyful bark, and for the first time in months, Noah felt a flicker of something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Inside, the house was filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of pine. A towering Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, its branches laden with ornaments collected over the years. Ethan hugged Noah tightly, slapping him on the back, while Caroline handed him a steaming mug of hot cocoa. The kids bombarded him with questions about his time in the Army, and though Noah tried to answer, his eyes kept drifting to Barry. The dog sat by the fire, his intelligent eyes watching Noah as if he could sense the turmoil in his heart. It was almost uncanny. That night, as the house quieted and everyone drifted off to bed, Noah found himself sitting on the floor next to Barry, absently scratching behind his ears. "I don't know if you remember her," Noah murmured, "but she loved you too. Lila used to sneak you treats when no one was looking." Barry tilted his head as if listening. "I don't even know if she's still here." Noah continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But if she is, I need to find her." Barry let out a low, encouraging woof, and for the first time, Noah allowed himself to believe that it might be possible. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Noah woke to find Barry waiting for him by the front door, tail wagging and leash in his mouth. Ethan chuckled when he saw the two of them. "Looks like he's ready for an adventure," Ethan said, clapping Noah on the shoulder. "Go on, take him out. You could probably use some fresh air." Noah wasn't sure what he was looking for as he stepped out into the crisp morning air with Barry trotting by his side. The snow crunched underfoot as they wandered through town, past familiar landmarks that triggered a flood of memories. The old diner where he and Lila used to share milkshakes, the park bench where they'd carved their initials. Everything seemed frozen in time. Everything except for her. As they walked, Barry suddenly stopped, his ears perking up. He let out a bark and tugged on the leash, his nose to the ground. "What is it, boy?" Noah asked, but Barry didn't wait for an answer. He pulled harder, leading Noah down a side street toward a small, quaint bookstore that Noah didn't recognize. The sign above the door read Lila's Literary Nook. Noah's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He hesitated, unsure if he could face her after all these years. But Barry barked again, urging him forward, and before Noah could stop himself, he was stepping inside. As the doorbell jingled above him, Noah stepped into the warm, cozy interior of the bookstore. The scent of old paper and cinnamon candles enveloped him, and the sight of shelves crammed with books made him pause. It was quiet, except for the soft hum of holiday music playing in the background. Barry trotted ahead, his nose twitching as if on a mission. Noah's pulse quickened as his eyes scanned the room. Then he saw her. Lila Matthews stood behind the counter, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She was helping a little girl pick out a book, her smile as radiant as he remembered. Time had added a new depth to her beauty, but it was unmistakably her. For a moment, Noah froze. He wanted to say something, to call out her name, but his voice caught in his throat. What would he even say? I left. You moved on. Let's pretend that didn't happen? Barry, however, had no such hesitations. The German shepherd bounded up to the counter, his tail wagging furiously, and barked. Lila looked up, startled at first, and then her eyes widened as recognition dawned. Barry? She said, her voice filled with both disbelief and delight. She crouched down, rubbing behind his ears as he nuzzled into her. I can't believe it. Look at you, old boy. When she straightened, her gaze met Noah's. Her smile faltered, and her expression shifted to something unreadable, shock maybe, or something deeper. Noah? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hi, Leela, he replied, feeling as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place he looked. I didn't know you were still in Evergreen. Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to piece together the years that had passed. I opened this store about 2 years ago, she said finally. I wanted to stay close to my parents after my dad got sick. She hesitated, then added, I didn't know you were back. I just got in yesterday, he said. Ethan told me I should come home for Christmas. There was a long, awkward pause. The little girl, still clutching her book, tugged on Lila's sleeve. Miss Lila, can I take this one? She asked. Lila blinked and forced a smile, nodding as she rang up the sale. When the girl and her mother left, the silence between Lila and Noah felt even heavier. You look good, Noah said at last, breaking the tension. So do you, Lila replied, though her tone was tinged with uncertainty. How long are you staying? I don't know yet, he admitted. Depends on how things go, I guess. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. I didn't know you were still here, Lila. I thought maybe you'd moved away or... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't want to say gotten married. Lila's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, I thought you'd forgotten about me, she said, her words sharp enough to sting. After the letters stopped, I figured that was your way of saying goodbye. Noah flinched. That's not what happened, he said quickly. I didn't mean to stop writing. Things just got complicated. Complicated, she repeated, her eyebrows arching. You think it wasn't complicated for me too? I waited, Noah. For years, I waited, and then I realized I couldn't keep holding on to someone who wasn't holding on to me. Her words hit him like a blow to the chest. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. How could he explain what it had been like over there? The fear, the chaos, the way every day felt like it might be his last. How could he tell her that he stopped writing because he didn't want her to worry, or worse, to mourn him if he didn't make it back? As the tension thickened between them, Barry nudged Noah's leg as if sensing his unease. The dog's presence reminded Noah of the promise he'd made to himself last night. He couldn't walk away this time. Not again. Lila, he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I hate that I did. But I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about you. About us. He hesitated, then added, if there's any chance, even the smallest chance, that we could start over, I'd like to try. Lila stared at him, her eyes brimming with emotions he couldn't quite decipher. Noah, she began, her voice trembling. I don't know if it's that simple. A lot has changed. I've changed. I know, he said. And I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was. I'm asking for a chance to prove to you that I'm not the same scared kid who left you behind. Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled again, and an older woman stepped inside, carrying a tray of cookies. Lila, sweetheart, I brought these for the Christmas Eve story hour, the woman said, smiling warmly at Noah. Oh, hello. I don't believe we've met. This is Noah, Lila said, her tone guarded. He's an old friend. Noah felt the sting of those words, but he nodded politely. Nice to meet you. As the woman set up for the event, Lila turned back to Noah. Look, she said quietly, I have to stay here for the story hour. But if you're serious about what you said, meet me at the old park bench tonight. You know the one. I'll be there, Noah said without hesitation. That evening, as the sun set and the town prepared for its Christmas Eve festivities, Noah sat on the park bench, Barry by his side. The minutes ticked by, and doubt began to creep in. What if she didn't come? What if she couldn't forgive him? Just as he was about to lose hope, Barry's ears perked up, and he let out a low bark. Noah followed the dog's gaze and saw her walking toward him, bundled in a red scarf and holding a small wrapped package. Lila, he breathed, standing to greet her. Lila stopped a few feet away, her breath visible in the crisp winter air, her eyes locked on Noah. In her hands she held the small wrapped package like it was something fragile, almost uncertain whether to offer it. For a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of unspoken words and years of separation hanging between them like the frost on the branches above. I wasn't sure you'd come, Noah said quietly, his voice laced with vulnerability. Neither was I, she replied, her tone softer now, almost tender. But Barry seemed pretty insistent. Her lips curled into the faintest smile as she nodded toward the dog, who sat patiently at Noah's feet, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Noah let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, he's good at that, pushing people to do things they're too scared to do themselves. She glanced down at Barry, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. I always loved him. He was always there, no matter what, even when I felt like everything else was falling apart. Noah swallowed hard, her words hitting a tender place in his heart. He's been that for me too, lately, he admitted, especially when I was over there. Sometimes thinking about him, about home, about you, it was the only thing that kept me going. Lila's eyes flickered with emotion, and she hugged the small package tighter. Why didn't you tell me, Noah? Why didn't you let me be there for you? I thought I was protecting you, he said, his voice thick with regret. I didn't want you to have to wait for me, not knowing if I'd make it back. I thought it would be easier for you if I just let go. Well, it wasn't, she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't easier, Noah. It was hell. I loved you, and I would have waited for you forever if you'd just let me, but you didn't even give me the choice. I know, he said, his hands clenched at his sides. I was a coward, Lila. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was just running away. I've thought about that moment every single day since. I've hated myself for it. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to tell you. I had to try. Lila looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she held out the package. Here, she said. I wasn't sure if I was going to give this to you, but I think you need to see it. Noah hesitated, then took the package from her hands. It was light, wrapped in simple brown paper with a red ribbon tied around it. His fingers fumbled slightly as he undid the bow and peeled back the paper. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. He opened it and froze when he saw what was inside. It was a collection of letters, not the ones he'd written to her, but the ones she had written to him. Dozens of them, all carefully copied into the pages of the journal in her handwriting. At the top of each entry, there was a date, and at the bottom a closing line. Wherever you are, I hope you know I still love you. Noah's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. You kept writing? I didn't know where to send them after you stopped replying, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But I couldn't stop. It was the only way I knew how to hold on to you. He looked up at her, his chest tight with a mix of guilt and gratitude. Lila, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. That's not for you to decide, Noah. You don't get to decide who deserves what. You just have to decide if you're going to keep running or if you're going to stay and fight for what you want. Noah's throat tightened, and he crouched down to stroke Barry's fur, as if grounding himself through the dog's steady presence. Barry looked up at him with those wise, understanding eyes, as though saying, "This is your chance. Don't mess it up." "I'm not running anymore," Noah said finally, his voice steady. He stood and met Lila's gaze. "I want to stay. I want to fight for this, for us, if you'll let me, Lila studied him for a long moment, her tears spilling over but her lips curving into a small, hopeful smile. "It won't be easy, Noah," she said. "There's a lot of hurt to work through, but if you're willing to try, so am I." Relief flooded through him, and before he could stop himself, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold, but they fit perfectly in his, just as they always had. Barry let out a happy bark as though giving his approval, and they both laughed, the tension finally breaking. They stayed on the bench for hours, talking and reminiscing as the snow fell softly around them. Lila told him about the years he'd missed, her father's illness, her decision to open the bookstore, the moments she thought she'd never recover from losing him. And Noah told her about the war, the friends he'd lost, and the nightmares that still woke him in the middle of the night. It was raw and painful, but it was real, and for the first time in years, Noah felt like he was finally coming home, not just to Evergreen, but to the one person who had always been his anchor. As the clock struck midnight and Christmas Day officially began, Lila leaned her head on Noah's shoulder, and Barry curled up at their feet. The town's Christmas lights twinkled around them, casting a soft glow on the snow-covered park. For the first time in years, Noah felt a sense of peace, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new together. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. Lila looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and the faintest glimmer of hope. "Merry Christmas, Noah," she said softly, and as they sat there with Barry as their silent guardian, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the promise of a new beginning. The morning after their emotional reunion on the park bench, Noah woke up to the sound of Barry scratching at the door of Ethan's guest room. The house was quiet, the only other sound, the faint crackling of the fire still burning in the living room hearth. Outside the window, snow blanketed the ground, glistening under the soft morning sun. Christmas morning had arrived. Noah sat up, his thoughts immediately drifting to Lila. Their conversation the night before had opened old wounds, but it had also planted the seed of something new, hope. For the first time in years, he felt like the weight he'd been carrying was a little lighter. He owed much of that to Barry. The dog had led him to Lila, and in doing so, had given him a chance he thought he'd never have again. By the time Noah made his way downstairs, Ethan and Caroline were bustling about the kitchen, a smell of cinnamon rolls wafting through the air. The kids were already tearing into their presents by the tree, their laughter filling the room. Barry, ever the opportunist, had stationed himself near the table, his nose twitching at the scent of bacon sizzling on the stove. "Merry Christmas, little brother," Ethan said, handing Noah a steaming mug of coffee. "You look like you slept better than you have in years." "I think I did," Noah admitted, taking a sip. "Thanks for convincing me to come home, Ethan," Ethan grinned. "Don't thank me. Thank Barry. He's the one who got you out of the house yesterday." Noah glanced at Barry, who was now happily munching on a piece of toast one of the kids had dropped. "Yeah," Noah said with a smile. "He's been my wingman in more ways than one." Later that morning, as the family gathered around the table for breakfast, Noah's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart leapt when he saw Lila's name on the screen. Her message was short but carried more meaning than words could convey. "Merry Christmas. I'd like to see you later. Bring Barry." By early afternoon, Noah and Barry were walking back toward Lila's bookstore. The town was alive with Christmas cheer. Carolers singing on street corners, couples strolling hand in hand, children laughing as they tossed snowballs in the park. But Noah barely noticed any of it. His mind was on Lila, and on what he wanted to say to her. When they arrived, the bookstore was closed, but Lila was waiting for them just inside, her red scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. She smiled when she saw Barry bounding toward her, and her smile grew even wider when Noah followed close behind. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said, echoing the words he'd spoken the night before. "I told you I'm not running anymore," Noah replied, his tone firm but gentle. She opened the door to let them in, and Barry immediately made himself at home, curling up on the rug near the fireplace. Lila gestured for Noah to sit, and for a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other, the crackling fire filling the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last night," Lila began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, about wanting to start over. "And I think I want that too, but it's not just about us, Noah. It's about who we've become since the last time we were together." "I know," he said, "and I'm not the same person I was back then. I've made mistakes, and I've been carrying the guilt of them for a long time. But I want to be better, Lila. I want to build something real with you, something that lasts." Her eyes softened, and for the first time she reached out to take his hand. "I want that too," she said, "but it's going to take time. We need to be honest with each other, even when it's hard. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," he said without hesitation. "No more running, no more hiding." Lila smiled, and for the first time, Noah saw the spark in her eyes that he remembered so vividly. It was the look she used to give him when they were teenagers, full of love and trust and just a hint of mischief. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and growth for both of them. Lila invited Noah to help out at the bookstore, and he found solace in the quiet routine of stacking shelves and greeting customers. The small shop quickly became a refuge for him, a place where he could find peace in the company of books and Lila's warm presence. Barry, of course, became the unofficial mascot of the store. Customers would stop by just to see him, and children would sit on the floor reading to him while their parents browsed. He had a knack for sensing when Noah or Lila needed comfort, whether it was resting his head on Lila's lap during a particularly emotional moment or nudging Noah out of bed on mornings when the weight of his memories threatened to pull him under. One evening, as they closed up the store, Lila found Noah sitting on the floor next to Barry, stroking the dog's fur. "You know," she said, leaning against the counter, "I think Barry has done more to bring us back together than either of us has." Noah chuckled, looking up at her. "He's always been the glue in this family. Even when I didn't realize it, he was keeping me tethered to something worth coming back to." Lila sat down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think he knew," she said softly. "I think he always knew we'd find our way back to each other." Noah pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his heart swelling with gratitude, for Lila, for Barry, and for the second chance he never thought he'd have. "I don't know what I did to deserve this," he murmured, "to deserve you." "You showed up," she replied simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes." On Valentine's Day, 2 months after Christmas, Noah and Lila officially reopened the bookstore with a new edition, a corner dedicated to therapy and military memoirs, aimed at helping veterans like Noah find solace and understanding. They called it Barry's Corner, in honor of the dog who had brought them back together. As customers poured in to see the new section, Barry lay by the fireplace, his tail wagging lazily. He watched as Noah and Lila worked side by side, their laughter filling the air. For the first time in years, Noah felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, not just an evergreen, but with Lila and Barry by his side. The following Christmas Eve in Evergreen was unlike any other Noah had ever known. Snow fell gently over the quiet town as the lights twinkled in every window, and laughter spilled out from homes filled with warmth and love. Inside Lila's bookstore, now bustling with life, a special gathering was taking place. Families came to read, to connect, and to enjoy the kind of quiet magic that only a place like Evergreen could provide. At the heart of it all sat Barry, now something of a local legend. Children gathered around him, reading stories aloud, while he basked in their attention. Barry's Corner had become more than just a section of books. It was a sanctuary for people seeking comfort, connection, and understanding. Veterans from nearby towns had begun visiting, inspired by Noah's journey, and the space became a small but powerful community for healing. Noah and Lila stood side by side at the counter, watching the scene unfold. Lila leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder as they took it all in. "A year ago," she said softly, "I didn't think I'd ever feel this whole again. But now, I feel like I have everything I ever wanted." Noah kissed the top of her head, his eyes misty. "You gave me back my life, Lila. You and Barry. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You already have," she replied, smiling up at him. "You came home. That's all I ever wanted." As the evening wound down and the last of the families left, Noah and Lila walked hand in hand through the snowy streets of Evergreen, with Barry trotting happily at their side. The world felt brighter, warmer, and more alive than it had in years. At the edge of the park, they paused by the old bench where they had first begun to heal. Noah looked at Lila, his heart full of gratitude and hope. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice steady with conviction. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you and with him." He gestured to Barry, who barked in happy agreement. Lila laughed, her eyes shining with tears. "I think we've got a pretty good team." The three of them stood there for a moment, their breath visible in the cold night air, the stars shining above like tiny beacons of hope. For Noah, this wasn't just a Christmas homecoming. It was the start of a new life. A life rooted in love, in second chances, and in the belief that even the most broken pieces could be put back together. As the church bells rang in the distance, signaling midnight and the arrival of Christmas Day, Noah pulled Lila into his arms, and Barry barked joyfully, as if to celebrate the miracle of their reunion. This was what Christmas was truly about, finding light in the darkness, love in unexpected places, and the courage to come home, even when it seemed impossible. And in that moment, Noah knew, with every fiber of his being, that he had finally found his way back to where he was meant to be.